Hello there, everybody. It looks like Jake Paul joined the MMA, but there's something he isn't telling you, and I wonder what that is.
So Jake Paul has officially signed with the PFL to fight in an MMA fight, but there's a few caveats that he might have left out that we're going to go to
Is this
in
stand-up
this
only?
video. Guys, before we do that, Fight Team Training is about to launch. We are literally days away, so make sure
I
you
don't
go
think
to
you could do
Instagram,
stand-up only in
you
MMA.
track
Since
what's
it's
happening, because there's a very good
MMA.
deal that is going to get you ahead of everyone else when it comes to your fighting and your ability to be a high-level athlete. So check that out. So Mr. Jake Paul has released this video right here going over everything that he is detailing in this partnership with the PFL. Now, guys, if you don't know
I didn't know my shit was so bad.
the PFL is a newer MMA organization, but they have really stepped it up and they've been doing great things, in my opinion. I would put them all along the lines of ONE FC or Bellator, not quite at the UFC, but this is another move for them to try to push themselves into that upper echelon of MMA organizations. Guys, let's watch.
To launch the PFL pay-per-view super fight division. Now, let me explain. I will be the head of fighter advocacy. And as the head of fighter advocacy, I'm going to use my platform to market PFL fighters and introduce them to my fans worldwide.
A couple things that he just mentioned there. First things first is he mentions he's going to be part of the new division, the super fight division. Well, a lot of people have been commenting already that this is just a way for him to be able to fight people that don't weigh as much as him, which hilariously is the first thing he does.
I'm so dedicated to this that I offered Nate Diaz a 2-fight deal.
By calling out former lightweight Nate Diaz as his first opponent. Now, guys, obviously, we all knew that they weren't just going to throw Jake Paul into the normal 185-pound division and expect him to flourish. He's a big, high-profile celebrity first, and he's a fighter second. So, obviously, they're going to be setting this up in a way with a new division for him, with new opponents, that is going to be a bit more beneficial to him as a fighter, which is honestly only fair, right? We didn't expect this guy to train for a couple years and go dive in there against high-level 185-pound fighters. That's not what was going to happen.
Lose.
But it is an important caveat that's why they've made a very special division for Mr. Jake Paul. When he talks about being the fighter advocacy representative, obviously that doesn't really mean much. Do we see Jake Paul going in from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, clocking in and working for the PFL? Probably not, but they've given him this title to indicate that he has a bigger involvement than just being a fighter on the roster. He is
invested maybe
with the PFL. And honestly, this is a huge move for Jake Paul. There's two key things that I want to point out here. Obviously, Jake's still going to want to box. He's still going to want to get that bag. However, I think that anyone with a good eye for boxing, anyone that's been seeing his ability progress, has realized that Jake is rapidly approaching the ceiling.
Get an education that fits your life and your budget with the most affordable college tuition in the
ceiling at which his boxing ability is going to be able to take him. Was Jake Paul ever going to be able to challenge for a world title at his weight? Probably not. Was he going to be able to put on exciting fights against older, not exactly prime fighters? Absolutely. So approaching that ceiling, this is the perfect time for him to transition to a new sport and do different things. It's honestly great. And I mean, I'm not a big fan of Jake Paul, obviously, but you cannot deny that the kid is exciting and he knows how to stay relevant and he knows how to put on exciting shows. And to me, this is another great example of that. Let's keep watching.
I personally will be deeply involved in making sure that the PFL is the best place in the world for fighters.
So this is a great example of the PFL attempting to poach as many UFC fighters, as many guys that are looking at the UFC as their career option when they're fighting. And they're realizing that, you know, maybe PFL, maybe Bellator, maybe ONE FC, maybe these other organizations.
Bro, the only thing, right, is that PFL doesn't roll off the tongue like UFC, right? That's the only thing, bro. Like the name, PFL. Doesn't sound right, bro. PFL. UFC. UFC rolls off the tongue.
Organizations are the better route. Anyone that's a fan of fighting should be a fan of fighters having more options. Shane Burgos is a great example of this. He recently, even though he had UFC offers on the table, realized the PFL offer was just better and went with them. That's the PFL's marketing tactic here. Is Jake Paul going to be heavily involved in the negotiation process of these individual fighters? Of course not. Is he going to be heavily involved in the marketing of the PFL as an organization? Probably.
As you guys know, I've been trying to increase fighter pay for all fighters worldwide. And with the launch of this new PFL Super Fight division, our fighters will be receiving 50% of the revenue. Yes, you heard that correctly. A true 50-50 partnership with fighters that still allows them to be individuals and even monetize their own sponsorship deals, which, as we know, isn't allowed in the UFC. You have to.
These are all great points. There's a couple things to break down here that might not seem as transparent as you might realize. First things first is when we talk about a 50-50 revenue split. Okay, are we talking about the headliners of the pay-per-view card? Who is getting this 50-50?
Yeah,
is
that's
50% of this split going to the entire card, decided upon being broken up by, you know, whoever is running the organization, and then the other 50 is taken by the organization? Is 50% going to the headliners? We don't know, and they pretty clearly don't detail this. Another thing to note is, even though no one is in denial that the UFC is obviously underpaying their fighters, most of them, a 50-50 split does not guarantee higher pay. In fact, it offers the opportunity for significantly lower pay if the PFL does not sell very many pay-per-view tickets, right? So that's a caveat that is very, very important to notice when we're talking about fighter pay, because if a pay-per-view doesn't do well, the fighter is going to get significantly less pay than if the UFC said, hey, we're going to guarantee $1 million for you to show up. We're going to guarantee $500,000 for you to show up. If the pay-per-view doesn't meet that number, which all UFC events do, so that's what makes that different. But in this situation where the PFL is in a smaller, growing organization, we don't know that guarantees more pay. Does it guarantee more independence of the fighter? Absolutely. And I still agree that it's a better revenue model, but I'm just saying don't get fooled by the smoke and mirrors of that situation. The biggest thing here, without a doubt for me, is allowing fighters to have their own sponsors and represent those sponsors in the cage. Obviously, UFC fighters are allowed to have sponsors, but that's outside of the cage. They're not allowed to have these sponsors on their shorts. And it's a massive hit when we talk about finances. This is why a lot of these fighters, a lot of smart guys, are using their fights as a platform to grow their social media accounts so that they can advertise on those social media accounts, because the UFC has stripped them of that ability within the cage. Fighters should absolutely be able to have independent sponsors. Even if the UFC limited how many sponsors there was, people were saying, oh, it makes them look like NASCAR drivers. Well, you could very easily say, okay, each fighter gets one thigh and their, ass as advertising spots, right? Each fighter gets 3 slots on their shorts, and that's it. It's very, very easy to work around. It's total BS that the UFC only is allowed to have Venom on these trunks, because obviously it just makes more money for the UFC.
And I am the first fighter to sign to the new PFL pay-per-view Super Fight division, and I'm taking this seriously, okay? Yes, I still want to become a world champion in boxing.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't. I love that, man. There's no way if you were trying to be a world champion in boxing, that you're going to divert a ton of your time to learning MMA, which is an incredibly difficult sport to get good at. There's no way. It's a smart business move to allow that ship to sail. Now, obviously, Jake is still trying to fight a boxing match in February, and it appears, judging by what he said about Nate Diaz there, it appears that he wants to box Nate Diaz as well after his boxing match in February. So you're probably wondering, okay, what is the timeline for this entrance? What is the timeline for Jake to actually fight in MMA? The PFL chairman, Don Davis, told ESPN that he would probably take some time. To quote, he said, "I think that what's making Jake interesting to fans is that he works hard and he doesn't underestimate what he takes." I don't know if that's what makes him interesting. He knows he's not ready for an MMA debut right now, but he's starting to train. I think it's going to be about 1 year from now, so early 2024, where you'll see him take on his first opponent. But the kind of opponents he is thinking of will shock the world in terms of their status and name brand. So that's a great example of being a realist when we're talking about this. Obviously, he's not going to fight right away, but I think that we see a pretty clear trend when it comes to his MMA entrance, right? We're not going to see Jake Paul be faced against a grappler right away. We're going to see him face against someone who maybe has a very limited background in grappling, maybe is significantly past their prime, maybe is a lot smaller than Jake. Some guys that come to mind for me, probably Mike Perry, probably Nate Diaz, probably Donald Cerrone. These are the kind of guys that might be on the radar of a guy like Jake Paul. definitely going to be guys that aren't going to present much risk when it comes to the grappling department, are definitely going to be smaller than Jake, and are definitely going to be more realistic in terms of
How could you see KSI laughing?
A lot of guys, look negatively.
How could you see KSI laughing and Jake Paul gets choked out
on this, but I think it's about being realistic, right? Is Jake Paul a world championship level fighter? No, he isn't, and that's okay. He's not trying to do that.
A lot of
we're
people
not watching an Oscar movie. We're watching The Fast and the Furious, right? Do you know what I'm saying?
It's about, what's wrong with The Fast and the Furious? This shit's fire.
Do you enjoy watching fights? And for me, I like it. It's curious, and like I said, there's no denying this kid knows how to be exciting. He knows how to make fun fights for fans. So this is a great move by the PFL. I think it's a good move by Jake Paul himself. I think that we've kind of deciphered a lot of what he's trying to say here and made it a bit more realistic than the obvious advertisement that he displays was. But at the end of the day, I think this is great. I think it's a cool transition. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he is able to balance both of these things and makes fun, exciting fights.
I mean, he could, because he doesn't do YouTube anymore, right? You got to keep the main thing though. But yeah, like, subscribe, see you guys later. Wait, hold on, let's check out the comments. Love them, hate them, you gotta give them props. Never thought in 2023 that would gain so much respect for Jake Paul. If he's genuinely dedicated to MMA like he was in boxing, you can make the cut to WWE. I don't know what this is. Maybe. But yeah, like, subscribe, see you guys later. Hope you have a good day or night.